Hello, Starshine. My name is Liz and this is my channel, Simsational Stories. If you have not seen my videos before and you enjoy this one, please like and subscribe, and maybe check out my other social media as well. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All relevant links are in the description below. Finally, before I begin my Simsational story, I'd like to issue this blanket content and trigger warning. The following story is just Sims, hey. I'm not going to apologise for treating them terribly, if that's what I've done. But I do want to assure you now that although I mean absolutely no harm, I completely understand if you feel unable to consume my content. Many loves, and we will catch each other on the internet elsewhere. Okay, so now I've gotten that over with. Let's go. Today's story is from Conservationist Kaiulani of Sulani, and we're at chapter 7. If you have not seen previous chapters and would like to catch up, there are playlists available on my channel so you can hear the entire story in chronological order. The rest of us are going to move on from where we left off last time though. So without further ado. Everyone said afterwards what a beautiful wedding ceremony it was. Alejandro's young son Angelo had been included in the ceremony. Kaiulani signed the adoption papers along with the marriage certificate, and Pastor Ramor had outdone himself with his opening speech before the vows, which they had written themselves, were spoken, and the pair were finally declared man and wife before all their close friends and family. The reception held afterwards in Tartosa was a fancy affair as well, with the newlyweds changing into party outfits on their way across the neighbourhoods. It was everything Alejandro and Kaiulani had ever dreamed of, from the church to the cake and everything in between. They had taken a long time and put a lot of work in to plan their wedding story, but it had all been worth it in the end. After the reception, Kaiulani and Alejandro bid everyone goodbye to leave for their honeymoon in Selvadorada. It was another of Kaiulani's lifelong dreams to visit Selvadorada. The beautiful jungle had deep historical roots to Kaiulani's Sudanese home, and Alejandro was just as excited to be able to explore the place with her. Meanwhile, Alejandro's young toddler son Angelo had stayed behind in Sulani with his grandmother. Nina had originally planned to just bring Angelo over to the commune of Ohana Hale, where she lived, and have him visit with her there, but after thinking about it for a few days, she decided to instead come stay at Kaiulani's and absorb what quality one-on-one time she could with the boy. Quality time was important for bonding purposes, or so Alejandro told himself as he and Kaiulani lingered at the back of the tour group often and, eventually, lost themselves in the shadows of the Selvadorada Museum, kissing passionately like the happy newlyweds they were. Alejandro felt like a teenager again, and he could barely keep his hands off his wife. This was the first time in a long time that he and Kaiulani had had any true alone time. Of course, they had sitters available, and they used them too sometimes, but this was different. Instead of a single night off, they had booked an entire week in a charming Selvadoradan cottage they had all to themselves. As is usual with many newlywed couples on their honeymoon, much of Alejandro and Kaiulani's time in Selvadorada was spent in the bedroom of the cottage they rented. It wasn't as if they'd never done all this before. They'd lived together for over a year after all, but somehow it all felt slightly different and more alluring now they were finally married, let alone on holidays in a different country. They did get out of the house enough to do some sightseeing, though. The Selvadoradan culture was fascinating, with many strange foods that took some getting used to. Neither Kaiulani or Alejandro were able to finish a plate at first, but they soon got over that, and even mastered a few dishes they planned to make again once they were back home. The landscape in Selvadorada was fascinating to both Kaiulani and Alejandro. The pair were avid gardeners who shared care of a large vegetable and flower garden at their home back in Sulani, and they were excited to be able to collect avocado seedlings to add to their collection. Kaiulani also took a bunch of photos for work. She hoped that comparing the untouched jungle to the polluted islands would be a helpful incentive for Sims visiting Sulani to take better care of the place. Springtime in Selvadorada was a beautiful time of year, and the jungle was thriving with almost as much life and passion as the newlyweds were. The jungle felt very much like home to the Sudanese couple, if a little more humid, and Kaiulani truly felt like she was connecting with her ancestors as she walked the forest floor. Alejandro was surprised to see Kaiulani not just walking the forest floor, but digging into it now too. She had never mentioned an interest in archaeology before, but then again, there weren't too many opportunities to explore the hobby back home in Sulani, especially with young Angelo to take care of. Kaiulani had not had a lot of time, but she had watched a lot of documentaries late at night while helping Angelo sleep as an infant. He had hated bedtime, and she had learnt a lot about ancient Omniscian history, and after speaking to some locals in the food market, she was certain that she could lead them straight to the temple. And she was right. As they made their way to the great temple, Kaiulani explained to Alejandro that, outside of documentaries on television, her only knowledge of archaeology came from books she had ordered online. It was one thing to read about artifacts, but a whole other thing to be able to dig up your own. Kaiulani confessed to Alejandro that, knowing what an archaeological hotspot Selvadorada is, she had bought a pop-up archaeology table before leaving home to bring with them on their adventures. That way, she could uncover any artifacts she managed to dig up, and possibly even learn enough to be able to authenticate some. Although Alejandro had little real interest in either ancient history or archaeology himself, he loved seeing his new wife so excited to explore and happily vowed to stay by her side and help her in any way he could. Together they explored the great temple of Selvadorada and made their way towards the back. There they found the famous Omniscian gates, mysteriously and dangerously locked gates that legend said were able to be opened by only the most nimble-minded of disciples. Kaiulani had watched several documentaries on the subject and was sure that the traps that held the keys to these doors would be in the room somewhere. Of course, it didn't hurt to at least try to get through. At least, it didn't hurt much. The almost magical-sounding electronic hum seemed to give off a sonic-like thrumming that got stronger and stronger as she edged closer, finally culminating in a startling zap to the hand Kaiulani reached out. After learning that lesson, Kaiulani and Alejandro walked quietly around the room looking for traps and triggers. It was just like Egypt. If they could only touch the right stone, pour the right sand into the right bowl, or touch the right statue in just the right way, they could deactivate those magical locks and get through the gate. Watching Kaiulani touch and tweak the skeleton statues in front of them, Alejandro wasn't sure he believed in all this. He was a very skilled and experienced warlock whose family had a weak magical bloodline running through it, and he could sense absolutely nothing all around them. Okay, yes, he had to admit the door thing was pretty weird, but he was also pretty sure he knew a spell that would work on it. There was no need to try traditional magic, though. At least, not yet, anyway. Alejandro was very surprised and actually rather impressed when, suddenly, his wife proved all his silent, suspicious doubt wrong with a final pull of a statue's spear. There was a loud clicking noise, some whirring, and a bright blue glow began to flourish in the skeletal eye sockets. Kaiulani couldn't believe her luck. Researchers had found that the Omniscian temple never appeared in quite the same configurations. However, they all shared certain similarities, and the spear thing, as she privately thought of it, had been such a cliché trope, she very nearly hadn't even tried it. It had worked, though. Kaiulani was so proud of herself. and couldn't wait to see what wonders the temple beyond had to show her. Everything around them right now was hundreds of years old, possibly thousands, and they were the first people to be walking through here since those times. It was so exciting. The next gate in front of them, one filled with a scary, mysterious, green, voluminous gas Kaiulani feared might be poisonous, Alejandro asked to handle himself. He had never seen anything like it before in his life, but that didn't stop him from boldly throwing every spell he could think of at the situation. It didn't work. Of course it didn't work. This was at Selvadorada, not Glimmerbrook, and just like he could feel no magic here, Alejandro could use no magic here. This just wasn't his world. Although, surely he could learn, couldn't he? Just as quickly as he had assumed he knew better, Alejandro quickly accepted that he didn't and determined to do better. It took him a little while, but that was fine, as Kaiulani felt rather tired and went for a quick nap in the portable tent she'd also thoughtfully purchased before they left home. While Kaiulani napped, Alejandro took a potion of plentiful needs and got to studying the artifacts around him before confidently making an offering to the sun glyph. This time, Alejandro made the correct choice, and by the time Kaiulani woke up, the final chapter of the ancient Omniscient Temple of Abundance was waiting for her to open, explore and document for future generations to hear about. She was at first so distracted by doing her historical duty that she did not notice the treasure chest. Alejandro had seen the treasure chest. He had been the one to unlock the final gate after all. But this whole archaeology thing was Kaiulani's dream and passion, not his. It was all incredibly interesting, of course, and he was glad to have shared the experience with Kaiulani for their honeymoon, but he had no interest in uncovering artifacts. Alejandro actually found the whole thing a little creepy, but Salvadorian culture held the belief that their ancient omniscient ancestors had wanted these places to be remembered and explored, and so, unlike in Egypt, tomb raiding was more than encouraged by the local government. By finding that treasure chest and opening it, Kaiulani was in fact completing a quintessential Salvadorian cultural experience. Kaiulani would remember her trip to Selvadorada for the rest of her life, having learnt various myths and legends as well as recipes while she was there. Exploring the archaeology and finding treasure had been a fascinating adventure, and she planned to document the display of her findings once she got home. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 7 of Conservationist Kaiulani of Sulani. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can tune in soon to hear the next chapter. If you're a Sims player too and you'd like to download any of my characters to play for yourself, just search the hashtag Simsational Stories on the Sims 4 gallery. All original content is created by This Is Not Eric. And hey, maybe think about sharing my channel with a friend. Or don't. It's your life. Anyway, bye.